Lucy.
And I'm Michelle.
Welcome to another episode of Tudoriferous, the biographical podcast that examines lives in the Tudor era.
And today, Cecily Neville.
No,
her daughter, Cecily York.
No, it's her granddaughter.
Oh, her granddaughter. And today, Cecily York.
Yes.
I'm like, Cecily. I got focused on the fact that we said we were going to turn Cecily Neville into an episode.
Yeah, we have. Yes, because you mentioned it at the question and answer thing, and I said I'd look. I can't remember. I did text you to say. I think I was on page 30 or something of my notes.
Notes.
And I thought, no, it's not a cameo.
It's going to be a long one.
So we'll keep that. She's in the box.
Yay.
We have new patron members to thank.
Ooh.
We haven't done this for a while because we haven't had a proper episode. Joshua Hunt, Tudor Tyke, Hilary Drake, Caitlin McLaren. So thank you all
Thank you.
very much indeed. And they will now, as we speak, be voting for our next victim.
Yes.
We've got 3 more days left. There's no point telling you that because it won't be 3 days then, will it?
When this goes out.
It'll be the distant, barely memorable past. Okay, well, we've made a complete mess of this
intro.
I haven't recorded for 2 weeks, and I think you can probably tell.
Yeah.
I've forgotten how to do it.
But I got to go see family, so it was good.
Come with me, if you will, to a room in a palace. A little girl sits by the window, playing with her doll and humming a little tune to herself. The door bursts open and her father rushes in. "Cecily, my girl, I've got you a good husband." "Thank you, father," she says, and carries on playing, humming and listening to the birds. Later, the door bursts open again. "Cecily, my girl, I've got you a different husband." "Righto, father," she says, holding out the doll to admire her dress. Later, the door bursts open once again. "Scrap that, we're going back to the first one." "Fair enough, father." She puts the doll in the cradle she's made to the wooden box and kisses it goodnight. The door bursts open again. ... Ad nauseam.
Gee, I wonder what the negotiations for her wedding are going to be like. Did you ever tally up how many husbands?
She had 3.
No, I meant were offered to her or negotiated for her while her dad was alive.
I think just the 2.
Oh, okay. So it's not that bad.
No.
That doesn't sound good. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll come to that. Well, we keep hearing about what riffraff the Woodvilles were.
Yes.
But Jacquetta of Luxembourg, Cecily's maternal grandmother, was a member of the royal family and could trace her ancestors back to Charlemagne. So,
yes.
Obviously, therefore, so could Cecily.
And Jacquetta could also, she was related to the royal house of Luxembourg, yeah.
Yeah.
She wasn't quite... Was she a princess or was she... I can't remember. I remember thinking, how did she end up with Rivers when he wasn't a nobleman?
It's a popular thing in that family. Because you think Edward IV...
married her daughter.
Elizabeth Woodville, her daughter. And that wasn't exactly a level situation.
Because Earl Rivers didn't become Earl Rivers until after...
He only became Earl Rivers because of that, yes.
Yeah, so Mr. Rivers, or Mr. Woodville, was Jacquetta's bit of rough.
Bit of rough, yes. Yeah. Well, she'd agreed with Henry V that she wouldn't marry without his permission. And then the next thing we hear, she's writing to him to ask forgiveness for having married without his forgiveness.
It was a scandal. I remember reading about that when I was doing reading through the Pastons, because she married so below her station. She didn't have permission from Henry, and she didn't have permission from her family either. And they were fined.
Oh, yeah.
They got in big trouble.
And then later... we'll find that Cecily follows in her grandmother and her mother's footsteps.
Yes. Well, her mother married up.
She married up.
Yes. She's not the bit of rough. Or she is the bit of rough.
Well, Cecily was born on the 20th of March, 1469, at Westminster Palace.
Wow, we know her birthday.
Yeah, same year as Machiavelli,
Ooh.
Gian Galeazzo Sforza, and he's the one that looks like a puppy, Ferdinand II of Naples, and Vasco da Gama.
Oh.
But I thought this was going to be a very short episode, and I thought, I'll look up on, Wikipedia has, you can look up years, and they tell you all sorts of things, exciting things that happen in that year. And I thought, we might have to pad it out with a bit of that. So that's how I know about that. But in fact, we don't have to pad it out.
Perfect.
Well, she was named after Cecily Neville.
Yes.
We just talked about.
Who is also going to get an episode. And I'm excited for that one because that was a very tumultuous time. And I think we've already covered the War of the Roses enough that you'll be able to focus on her without having to...
Yes, it is difficult to have to keep saying, yeah, that's the battle where such and such and such happened.
Yeah.
Was Princess Cecily a disappointment? She was the third girl, after all.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you can see it as a joke the first time. Second time, yeah, come on then. Stop trying harder. Third time.
Yeah, what are you doing? You're not delivering. But at the same time, Edward and Elizabeth, anything that I read about them is that they adored their children.
He's not Henry VIII. Definitely not. I mean, he's similar in many ways, but definitely not in this one, because he said that if they had no sons, his eldest daughter, Elizabeth, would succeed him.
Yes.
So he was quite happy about that.
Yeah, we're fine. We're good.
Yeah. But that's what Empress Matilda's dad said, wasn't it? And that's not quite how it panned out.
But there were extenuating circumstances. She was raised in Germany, so the people didn't know her.
She was in Germany at the time.
She wasn't in Germany at the time. She was with her husband, but still not in England. Her husband was loathed by the English. So she had a lot of things against her, whereas Elizabeth is in England. She's not married. There was a lot of potential there. So I don't think it would have been that disastrous.
Hopefully. But then there might be some powerful people around that say, you know what we said? Yeah, well, scrap that. He's not around anymore to complain.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't
know either.
It didn't happen, so...
Yeah, unfortunately.
To celebrate Cecily's christening, we know that Edward got in 2 barrels of Hippocras and a pipe of Gascon wine.
What is a pipe? How much is a pipe? And why is it called a pipe?
I don't know. Does it come in something pipe-shaped?
I don't know. Let's look it up, because I read that the other day, and I was like, what in the heck is a pipe of wine?
I was thinking that's probably a normal Saturday night for Margaret Beaufort, isn't it? 2 barrels of Hippocras and a pipe of Gascon wine.
Oh, my goodness. Ooh. Okay, now a pipe is 60 dozen or 720 bottles of wine. That's what a pipe is. That's a lot of wine.
That's a lot of wine, on top of all that Hippocras.
Yeah.
Whew. I think they did drink an awful lot, didn't they?
Yeah, so 126 imperial gallons. Wow. A butt of wine is 108 imperial gallons. Interesting. They actually had names for the amount of wine they were drinking in that much. Like that amount. That's a huge amount to say it's so common. We're going to give it a name.
Yes. You can imagine, different size champagne bottles.
Yeah.
None of them are sort of barrel size, aren't they?
Wow.
Yeah. Right, Cecily's parents, King Edward and Elizabeth Woodville, set off on progress shortly after her birth, and they took the 2 elder girls with them, Mary and Elizabeth, as well as Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and the Queen's brothers, Anthony and John Woodville. And presumably Richard, later to be Richard III, and Anthony, later to be executed on the orders of Richard III, got to know each other quite well on this journey. Just leave that hanging in the air with a bit of foreshadowing there. Cecily didn't go. She stayed at home because she was only 3 months old, and I don't think you took 3-month-old babies on progress with you.
No,
dangerous enough at the best of times.
Yeah.
But politics got in the way of the progress, and Edward had to leave to deal with the Earl of Warwick and George, Duke of Clarence. Elizabeth carried on without him, and they were treated to various pageants and performances in Norwich, cut short by a massive rainstorm. And then the news of the Battle of Edgecote reached them, and Cecily's maternal uncles, Earl Rivers and John Woodville, had been executed on Warwick's orders. I thought it might be interesting to look at Cecily's family at the end of the episode and see what happened to them all.
Oh dear, that sounds depressing.
Well, yeah, it just hit home just how horrendous it was.
Yeah.
Being in a noble family during the War of the Roses.
Yeah.
You had a lot of time in black, I think.
Yeah, not just the loss of your family, but then the loss of security. Because when they were tainted, all your property disappeared too. Gosh, it'd be horrible. Horrible.
Mm. And then to cap it all, Elizabeth now heard that Edward had been captured by Warwick.
Right.
Yeah. And just when she must have been thinking that things couldn't get any worse, Cecily's grandmother, Jacquetta, was then accused of witchcraft.
Yeah.
Lead images of Edward had been discovered on her property, which it was claimed she had used to make him fall in love with her daughter. Because what other explanation could there be for Edward throwing away a good foreign marriage?
Oh, yeah.
Mm. Jacquetta was incensed. I
yeah.
think she spent, having read about her now at length, I think she spent quite a lot of her life incensed.
Oh, did she?
and I think she very often had very good reason.
Oh.
Anyway, she wrote to the mayor, reminding him how she'd stopped Margaret of Anjou from ransacking London when she, Jacquetta, was her lady-in-waiting and friend.
Yes.
But whether it was that or whether he thought the accusation was just ridiculous, he did agree to help.
Well, it is ridiculous. There's no such thing as a witch. Thank you.
Well, yeah. Right, problem solved.
Yes. Logic.
Yeah, I just thought you by this point, we've been doing this for 3 years now.
Yeah, I know.
Still, you're looking for the logic. In October 1469, Edward escaped from Warwick, or at least it dawned on Warwick that he wasn't going to be able to rule through Edward as he'd hoped. Many people were fine with the idea of Warwick being a powerful man, but, you can't take the king prisoner. I mean, that's
going
just
a
not
bit
on.
far.
Yeah.
Yeah, come on. You have to kill them. You can't just take them.
Yes. Yeah, make your mind up. What are you going to do? Anyway, Warwick was forced to let him go. On his return, Edward must have felt that he had to do everything by the book and show that no one was above the law, because Jacquetta was brought before the King's Council.
Yes.
But her accusers dropped the charges and she was acquitted.
Yes.
Cecily Neville and Jacquetta were good friends, so the whole family must have been aware of the problem.
Isn't that interesting that they were good friends? Because I thought... Okay, I think I'm being colored by Philippa Gregory's novel. Because in my head, Cecily Neville does not like the Woodvilles because she married down and they didn't talk to each other for like a year. But
she doesn't, no. I think she finds it very hard to forgive her son for that.
Yeah.
You can still be friends with somebody you've known a while and not want your son to marry their daughter, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I think that she found that hard to forgive.
Yeah. Why? I don't know why. I'm not there. I don't understand why you'd be upset.
Well, he's king. She had hopes for him. And then he suddenly announces, "Oh, Mother, I've married Elizabeth Woodville." You've done what?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And she did have I don't know why we're talking about her. It's the wrong Cecily. But anyway, she did have a very high sense of her own worth and her own nobility.
Yes.
So anyway, back to the other one. In 1470, while Edward was waiting for the invasion by Warwick, because he, if we remember, had fled to France, allied with Margaret of Anjou and gained Louis XI's help to have another go at the English throne. And Duke of Clarence had married Warwick's daughter, something Edward had expressly forbidden him to do. Well, he's a one. I mean, he's just done it, hasn't he? There's a page in our website dedicated to the War of the Roses, so if you need a reminder of all that, go there.
Yeah.
Because we can't do it. We can't keep going through it all the time.
Every time. No.
Cecily and her sisters, our Cecily, were moved to the Tower for their own safety. Warwick and Clarence gathered an army, ostensibly to support Robert Wells in Lincolnshire, and then they suddenly showed their true colours and started to march on Edward. In the meantime, Robert Wells was executed. And I mentioned this because we have a family tie with Mr. Wells later.
Do we?
So, the Welleses come up again.
Okay.
Edward and his brother Richard fled to Flanders. When they heard this, Elizabeth Woodville, her sisters, her mother and her daughters leapt on a barge and sought sanctuary in Westminster Abbey.
Yes.
And they were taken under the protection of the Abbot of Westminster, Thomas Myling or Milling, and I've seen both, and who gave them his house to live in. Which is nice of him.
Right. I keep forgetting that, and maybe people don't know this, Westminster Abbey wasn't just the abbey itself, the building with the church in it.
It's got a whole complex.
Yes,
yeah.
It's an entire complex. It's almost a little town. They have their own blacksmith. They have their own cook-off on one side. Yeah. Yeah, they have their own printer. So, yes, it's not that she's in the basement of the church like has been portrayed on TV.
Yeah.
She's in a little palace, kind of. It's a very nice manor.
Yes, and he gave it to them because the abbey itself was filling up with criminals. And they were also seeking sanctuary.
Don't go there. The prisoners are there.
They didn't seem like very appropriate companions for the royal family. So he said, you better come and live with me or live in my house. And ordinary Londoners helped them as well. A butcher called John Gould donated half a cow and 2 sheep a week.
Oh, wow.
When I hear half a cow, I just imagine this thing still standing with its horns just sliced.
You get this half today, next half. Oh, dear.
Yeah, front or back. And a fishmonger made sure they were catered for on fast days as well. So they spent 5 months in sanctuary. Yeah, and we've been hearing how cramped and miserable it was. Doesn't sound it, actually.
No.
They're living in someone else's house and eating someone else's food.
Yes, and I thought people donated clothing and everything to them, cloth to have their dresses made.
Donating lots of things.
At the same time, you think, hey, that must mean they were popular.
Yeah. I don't think their second sanctuary was so comfortable. And also, as far as Elizabeth Woodville was concerned, her husband may never get back to England. So, I wonder what her long-term plans would have been.
Oh, yeah.
They couldn't stay in sanctuary forever.
No.
So there must have been a time of enormous worry for the whole family.
Yeah.
So they spent a lot of time in situations of worry, I think. But luckily, the following year, Edward IV did return, and the family went to Baynard's Castle, which is home of her grandmother Cecily Neville. Which you think, was that awkward? Because from what I can work out, Cecily Neville was Richard Neville, that's the Earl of Warwick's aunt, and she's also Edward IV's mother-in-law.
Yeah.
Tricky.
Yeah. They're all sitting around to Christmas dinner, and it explodes.
Glowering at each other. When Edward set off to fight Warwick in what would turn out to be the Battle of Barnet, Cecily Neville, Anthony Woodville, and the Archbishop Thomas Bouchier went to the royal chambers in the Tower. I'm not sure why it was only these people. I don't know where the rest of the family had gone. It seems an odd selection of people.
Yeah.
Cecily Neville, Anthony Woodville, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. Thomas Bouchier appears to have been a friend of the family, so it wasn't surprising that later Elizabeth Woodville would trust him when he told her to hand the boys over to Richard III.
Oh, gosh.
We'll come to that. Warwick was killed at the Battle of Barnet, and then Margaret of Anjou was captured, and her horrible son Edward was killed at the Battle of Tewkesbury. And we heard about that because William Stanley graciously broke the news.
Yes.
And while Edward IV was on his way back to London, a Lancastrian faction attacked the Tower of London. They were repelled, but the tower Cecily was in was fired on from the river. So scary.
Terrifying.
But then Henry VI died of displeasure and melancholy. And blunt instrument trauma. But that might have been as a result of the attack on the tower, because Edward might have realised that attacks like that would carry on as long as Henry was still alive.
Yeah.
So there might have been a direct correlation between the attack and Henry's death. Because it did seem to happen, he'd been alive, he'd been sitting in the tower, humming to himself.
Yeah. And the hammer was named displeasure, and the mace was named melancholy.
Yes. Yeah. And it just seemed to happen all of a sudden. Well, maybe it wasn't all of a sudden. Maybe it was Edward thinking, I'm not having my daughter go through that again.
Yeah. That's way too dangerous.
Yeah. Anyway, what was little Cecily doing
crying.
Well, she was just
if
growing.
if she's in the tower with things being bombarded, I could imagine she'd be afraid and crying.
She's still only little. It's hard to realise that all this has taken place in only 2 years.
Yeah.
She's still very little. But her father is now the undisputed king, and it's a time of relative peace for the family. So, as a celebration, she was present at the reburial of her grandfather, the Duke of York, at Fotheringay. And this was, if you remember, this is Richard, Duke of York, and his head was cut off and stuck on Micklebar Gate in York, wearing a paper crown.
Yeah.
Well, his head has been now reunited with his body. I remember there was a term for this, so I had to look back at John de Vere's episode to look it up. Interment.
Interment, yeah.
No, just terment.
Oh,
not
terment.
Interment. Yeah, and that's specifically reuniting the head with the body. Not a expression we need very often these days, thankfully.
Yeah, but common enough that they made a word for it.
Yeah, common enough at the time, yes. But we don't, on the whole,
Edward
separate
had him
people's
buried
head
like
with
a
bodies.
king, didn't he? Like as if it was
Yes.
a royal burial. So much for the
Yeah,
paper
well, it seems
crown.
everybody was there, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, going back to Cecily of Neville, she described herself as princess and
Yes.
queen and things, yes. She just completely ignored the fact that Richard never became king. Cecily was also there at the marriage of her younger brother Richard of Shrewsbury, and Anne Mowbray, when he was 6 or 7. Sadly, Anne died soon afterwards, and as we know, poor little Richard was dead just 5 years later, so...
Yeah.
Yes. That's the thing with history, isn't it? You see happy occasions and you think, yeah, that's not going to last.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially for this time period.
Yeah. The negotiations for Cecily's own marriage started in 1473 when she was just 4. And she was to marry the small boy who was to become James IV of Scotland when they were both old enough.
Oh, was she?
There's plenty of time. He's just 1.
Okay.
And this arrangement came with a 45-year truce between England and Scotland. I'm not sure why they plumped for the time 45, but it must have...
No.
I'm trying to think if it comes up to a special date, but not particularly. It's 1473. No.
No.
Her dowry payment started the following year. And the dowry arrangements were really convoluted.
Wait, before the marriage, they started the dowry payments before a proxy marriage and everything?
Well, the proxy marriage came between.
Oh, okay.
But they did the proxy marriage. But yeah, I mean, he was on it.
Wow.
Yeah. And you think how he was with his sister, Margaret.
Yeah.
She never saw a penny.
That's why I'm saying, wow. She saw some of it. She saw the pre-contracted marriage dowry get paid. It's just once the marriage was done, he's like, man, don't have to pay anything. You're already done.
She's not coming back, is she? Yes, this contract. If Prince James died during the lifetime of his father, Cecily was to get all her husband's land possessions. If James became King of Scotland, or if his mother died during the king's lifetime, Cecily would receive the land possessions of the Queen, which seems a bit odd, because if James became king, Cecily would get his mother's land, even though she was still alive. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that is a little...
Mother-in-laws do seem to get...
shafted.
Sometimes get... shafted is the word, yes. If Cecily or her husband died, then the second son of King James, also called James, would marry one of Cecily's sisters.
That's hedging your bets to make sure that it's James the Fourth. All the sons are named James. The next king is going to be a James.
It saves all that trying to remember the names of your children.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, he'd marry one of her sisters, provided she wasn't older or younger than the prince by more than 3 years. So that seems an odd thing when we've seen such huge gaps in age between some of them. And this was agreed to despite the fact that James III didn't have another son called James. Oh. He didn't have any other sons at all. James number 2 didn't yet exist.
Oh. And you can see that I do not know Scottish history very well, that I didn't clue into that.
Well, there is a James later, but he doesn't exist yet. I don't think James III is doing a Ferdinand and Isabella. I know I'm pretty sure that Edward IV knew there wasn't a second James. It's, a very early days, and they can bide their time until there is another son called James. And there was. He became a bishop. Wow. Edward IV and James III were to meet in Berwick in 1475 to hand over the first part of Cecily's dowry. And the meeting must have taken place since on the 20th of June 1475, Edward IV signed a will according to which his successor would have to pay the remaining amount of 18,000 marks for the dowry for the princess.
That's such a surprise. He didn't want to pay his sister's dowry, but definitely getting his daughter's done.
Mm.
Didn't love his sister as much. Surprise, surprise.
Well, I suppose maybe he felt more responsibility for his daughter. I mean, daughters are daughters, but sisters are just sisters. I don't know.
Yeah.
In October 1474, so the previous autumn, she had officially become Princess of Scots after the proxy wedding in Edinburgh. And the Earl of Crawford stood in for James, and Baron Scrope stood in for Cecily. And this alliance wasn't popular on either side of the border.
Oh, I can imagine.
But James III was very keen. And I wonder if it was because his grasp on the throne was quite tenuous, since he'd made himself unpopular, demanding taxes for the wedding ceremony. So there's a vicious circle for you. If you hadn't had the damn wedding, you wouldn't have to demand the taxes. Maybe he was thinking he might need the greater military clout of England to back him up against his enemies. I don't mean outside enemies, I mean Scottish
his
enemies.
Own enemies,
Yeah.
yes.
But he wasn't to know that his main enemy would later be that little 1-year-old boy of his.
Yeah.
James began to worry when in 1481 he said that Cecily should come to Scotland now, because she's 12. Had quite a big leap. I mean, she's not had anything interesting to talk about.
She was growing up.
4 till
she
12.
was learning at her mother's knee, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And 12 is the age that they're allowed to marry now. They're allowed to say, yes, I will marry this person.
Yeah, quite old enough now. James sent an embassy to pick her up, but Edward prevaricated. And you think, why is he hesitating? He said he was worried that James III was only motivated by getting his mitts on the rest of Cecily's dowry. You think, well, yeah, that's what a dowry's for, isn't it? It's to tempt the father-in-law into taking your daughter.
Yes.
So it did seem a strange reason. Or did Edward know something about Scottish politics that made him fear that marrying Cecily to young James would be throwing away a potentially better alliance? Did he think that James's side of the family might soon be sidelined?
Ah.
That's entirely possible, because the following year, Alexander, the Duke of Albany, turned up at the English court, having been arrested by his brother and accused of treason.
Yeah.
And he was the father of John Stuart, Duke of Albany, and later Regent of Scotland, who got his own cameo episode.
Yes.
And wore that jacket. I think it was covered in butterflies, wasn't it? It was a coronation of Francis I. We thought he must have looked really ridiculous. Then James III raided the north of England, quickly realised he'd made a big mistake and sent Edward a letter saying, oops, ignore that. That didn't happen. The person responsible for this incursion, incidentally, was Archibald Douglas, the Earl of Angus, the father of the Archibald Douglas that we came across married to Princess Margaret and making her life a misery.
Yes.
So, a lovely family. Just to be on the safe side, James III got in touch with Louis XI of France, asking for troops and weaponry in case the English should try anything. So he's got a marriage alliance with Cecily.
And yet
he's in touch with England's enemies, saying, I've just done something a little bit foolish.
Wait.
I don't think England's going to be very happy with me.
I'm trying to think of the date of this. Is Edward already getting his pension from Louis the First? Or 11th, sorry.
Oh, I don't know.
Because then he's not an enemy, because they kept talking to each other like, oh, my brother, and we'll go against Burgundy. Well, actually more Brittany than Burgundy.
We are in... What year are we in? 1481. Shall we have a look?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's getting the French pension.
So it's Picardy, isn't it? Treaty of Picardy, 75, yes.
Yeah, so he's getting the French pension, and that's not his arch enemy. They're in the midst of the facade of being brothers.
Yeah.
So now you're...
All one big happy family now then, aren't they?
Yeah. So his daughter, Edward's daughter, is betrothed or affianced to the Dauphin right now, too. So you've got one daughter with Scotland, one daughter with France, eventually.
That's hedging your bets, isn't it?
Yeah. And now those two, one of them is trying to get the other one to attack you. Okay, this is fun.
Yeah. There is an alternative timeline for this. It may be that James raided England because Edward was siding with Alexander, which seems more likely to me.
Yeah.
I think. Because I don't think James would scupper the chances. Unless he was annoyed about Edward not sending Cecily up when he asked him to.
Oh, more of a rough wooing?
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, Henry VIII does that later.
Well, scenario 1 would imply that Archibald Douglas was a loose cannon, raiding as he pleased, and since we know of the Douglas family,
it's possible.
That's quite possible, yeah. And scenario 2 would mean that James had sanctioned the raiding, and the only reason for that would be annoyance with Edward.
Yeah.
Either for the fact he hasn't sent Cecily up, or he's discovered that he's siding with the person who's trying to push James off his throne, which would be a perfectly natural reaction. But either way, he'd just given Edward the excuse he needed, and he immediately switched sides, Edward did. And Cecily found herself betrothed to Alexander rather than the young Prince James.
Oh dear, but they've already done the proxy wedding, so does he get a dispensation for this?
He needs more than just a dispensation for that. He's already married.
Oh.
He's married to Anne de la Tour, and that's the Duke of Albany. John, Duke of Albany's mother.
Oh.
So he needs to have a little word with the Pope about that as well.
Oh, that's going to be a fun family dinner that evening. By the way...
Yes. By the way, darling...
Can you please pack up your stuff? There is a convent down the road that I think you would find very comfortable. Love you.
Yes. I might have done it by text, maybe. Well, no, probably not, because the treaty said that he would have to break with Anne in accordance to all Christian norms within a year. So, don't just dump her. You've got to do it properly. And doing it properly probably implies... Well, it can't imply... Because usually you say, oh, well, she can't give me a son.
Yes.
But they've already got John, so...
Right. Oh, the son would not be happy. He'd be declared a bastard.
Yeah.
Oh, awkward dinners.
Yeah, the son wouldn't be talking to the father.
No. The wife
mother would be in tears.
Well, she might, but it won't be nice.
Yes. Yes. But tell your father to pass the marmalade. No, I'm not talking to him. Yeah, tricky. And it's just as well for Edward IV that he could use James III's raids as an excuse, since he could hardly say, well, I want to break it off because I want to overthrow you and put your brother on the throne. But that is exactly what he wanted to do, because on the 11th of June, 1483, the Treaty of Fotheringay was signed between Edward and Alexander. And Alexander declared himself King of Scotland and swore loyalty to Edward, saying that he would break off the old alliance with France. And he signed it, Alexander R.
Oh, that's going to be awkward. Nobody in Scotland is going to want you there. Nobody.
He's not as popular as the English had hoped.
No. All you have to do is sign loyalty to the English and you're no longer popular.
And also these people big themselves up to such an extent that people think, okay, well, yeah, we'll come along with you if you say that everybody's going to follow you when we get there. That sounds great.
Yep.
And you get there and you think, where is everybody?
Yeah.
It's strangely quiet. And that's what happened. Edward sent Alexander and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, to Scotland to overthrow James III with 20,000 troops. And Francis Lovell was there too. And I think Henry Percy, from what I remember. Berwick and Edinburgh both submitted without a fight.
Really? Mm-hmm. Well, I guess you get tired of constantly going back and forth between the two and losing everything.
Berwick must have been driven mad by... Yeah. Berwick was surrendered by the Earl of Crawford, who had been James IV stand-in at the proxy wedding. So that's how quickly everything changes. 1 minute you're the stand-in of a proxy wedding, and next minute you're fighting them off.
Jeez.
Berwick then remained in English hands, so that was it after that. I've got a feeling they decimated Berwick on the way back down, but I'm not sure whether that's because it rebelled again or whether the soldiers were just miffed at not getting a fight in Edinburgh.
Is that Berwick upon Tweed?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I had read about it at one point that it was, unfortunately, the most contested area between Scotland and England and got it every single time.
And it's still at war with Russia.
Yeah, all by itself.
Yes. And I suppose they'd expect us to stand up for it if it got invaded.
I wonder if anybody knows that. Yeah, Berwick upon Tweed is at war with Russia, technically, and has been for a very long time.
I think, I don't know the circumstances why Russia and, was it Russia and Scotland declared war or something? And while Berwick was in Scotland, and then it became English
so
when the Scots the Scots made peace.
Yeah.
And then it became Scottish again, and then became English again. So I think it was that way round. Might be that England declared war, I don't know. Anyway, I would advise listening to Rex Factor episode on James III, since it now gets a little bit complicated. And this is Cecily's episode, not James's. I'll put a link on the Podbean page for Rex Factor. James III was in Edinburgh Castle as a prisoner of some of his nobles who had rebelled. And it proved to be lucky for him, since it ensured his safety when Alexander and Richard invaded, because Richard didn't have the resources to besiege the castle. The castle was defended by Lord Darnley. That's a name to conjure with later.
Oh.
Also, when the terms of the Treaty of Fotheringhay became known in Scotland, support for Alexander just crumbled.
I can imagine.
They didn't want to be vassals of England, it turned out.
Nope.
Yeah. The best Richard could get was a pardon for Alexander and a promise by James III that he'd repay Cecily's dowry. So, in a bizarre turn of events, Alexander now became his brother's keeper in Edinburgh Castle. So at this point, the Scottish kingship could have gone either way. It could have been James, it could have been Alexander.
Wow.
Alexander and James were sort of reconciled.
I wonder if you can ever really be reconciled after that.
It's a bit like George Duke of Clarence and Edward IV, you think.
Yeah.
Reconciled?
No.
Well, the wedding's back on with Cecily and Prince James. James III must have really wanted this match, because I'm not sure I'd be so forgiving.
No.
But also that his nobles were putting pressure on him to resume the betrothal because they felt it was the only way to get English troops off Scottish soil. All right, we'll have the damn wedding. Just go. Soon after this, the reconciliation must have broken down. Alexander had renewed his treaty with Edward IV, and that had lost him any credibility in Scotland, even if he had any.
How to lose credibility 101.
How to lose credibility when you didn't have any in the first place. An attempt was made on James III's life, and Alexander was back in the English court. And Cecily found herself betrothed to him again. So it's gone James, Alexander, James, Alexander. In 1492, Edward appears to have had enough of it, and it was all off with Scotland for once and for all. So Margaret Tudor was the lucky recipient of James IV.
Oh dear, poor Margaret.
And as we know, Alexander died in a duel or jousting accident with Louis, Duke of Orleans.
Yes.
Louis XII.
Louis XII.
On a happier note, 1480, Cecily, with her sister Mary, was made Lady of the Order of the Garter. And really, her main, if not only qualification for this was that she was a member of the royal family.
Yeah, I would like to know what the ladies of the Order of the Garter, what their role is.
I have absolutely no idea. Maybe we ought to do a Patreon episode on the Order of the Garter, since we said that is what Patreon people are.
Yes. Okay.
And then, in 1483, Edward suddenly died. And life for all the Woodville children was turned completely on its head.
It wouldn't have been for Cecily if he had let her go get married. So now she's unsettled because her dad said, no, we're not sending her up there.
Yeah. Probably been quite unsettled if he had, though.
Yes.
But I suppose she'd have been out of the main difficulties in England. But she's now the second eldest. Mary has died. And, she should have had a rosy future to look forward to as sister of the king. But we know that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Richard III took over and the Woodvilles were sidelined, at the very least. Yes, sorry. I just haven't called them the Woodpiles. Edward V was handed over to his uncle Richard, the boy's tutor, then it seems friend, Anthony Woodville, and Richard Grey, that's Cecily's maternal uncle and half-brother, were executed on the orders of Richard.
Yeah.
After a mock trial presided over by Henry Percy. And Cecily was forced to go back into sanctuary with her mother and siblings. And they were in sanctuary for 9 months. During this time, Elizabeth Woodville was persuaded by Thomas Bouchier, the Archbishop of Canterbury, to hand over her sons to Richard III, or hand over the younger one.
Now, there's guilt right there. You just gave up your sons and they both disappear. God.
Well, his argument was that the two boys should be together. You know, all brothers together. But why? I mean, they hadn't been brought up together. They didn't know each other that well. I mean,
No.
maybe Bouchier convinced himself that this was the case.
I don't know, but I sure hope he feels guilt. Felt guilt. He's not alive anymore.
The other argument was young Richard couldn't claim sanctuary since he'd not been threatened by anyone and hadn't committed a crime. And that was the 2 criteria for sanctuary.
Oh.
But that would surely have applied to his mother and sisters too.
Yeah.
But that was according to Thomas More, written 30 years later. And my belief in Thomas More is getting thinner and thinner, I think, the more we read about him.
Oh.
Well, what was Bouchier's role in all this? He was a friend of the family, it seems. He'd gone to the royal apartments of the Tower with Cecily on one of the many other downs on this roller coaster of their lives. He did help he helped to organise Henry VI's Love Day. So I don't know what that says about him.
Well done.
So was he the unwitting dupe of Richard, or was he complicit in abducting the boys? He'd sworn to be faithful to Edward V, yet he crowned Richard III. But then also he crowned Henry VII. So.
Yes. Oh.
But, I mean, he's Archbishop. That's what you do. That's
yes,
your job.
that is your job.
The Cardinals of the Holy Roman Church website said that he was not complicit in the murder of the princes and is thought to have conspired against Richard.
What else would they say, though?
Well, you can have bad cardinals.
Let's read what they say about Wolsey and we'll compare. If they say he's a saint, then we'll know.
Well, they obviously think that Bouchier thought the boy would be safe. I don't know what to make of him.
I can't imagine that they would think that they'd kill a 9-year-old boy. You don't think people are monsters like that. You wouldn't conceive of doing it, so you don't assume others would. I don't know. That's a tough thing to answer.
Well, according to Moore, I mean, we know he's not above making up conversations. Bouchier promised the boy his protection, but if Elizabeth refused, quote, he never intended more to move her in that matter, in which she thought that he and all others, also save herself, lacked entirely wit or truth, unquote. So Moore thinks that Elizabeth didn't trust the Archbishop, but she thought that he would abandon her if she didn't do as he said, and she'd be left entirely on her own. She told Bouchier, again, according to Moore, quote, as far as you think that I fear too much, be well aware that you fear not as far too little, unquote.
Because he was right there listening to that conversation.
Well, he's writing with hindsight, and he knew the boys had disappeared. So it'd be interesting to know what she thought at the time. Yeah, it's very hard to live through it knowing what we already know. Well, why did she hand the boy over? And I know it's not really anything to do with Cecily, but we're not doing an episode on Elizabeth Woodville, so we might as well thrash it out here. And he was Cecily's brother. She must have been worried sick about him. Yeah. Edward V was already in the Tower, but that's not inherently bad. It's a royal residence as well as a prison.
And it's where, traditionally, the royals housed before they got crowned.
Yeah, that's right. She must have been aware that he was surrounded by Richard's men. He does have his own household servants, but even then, it sounds sinister to us, maybe.
Yes.
But would it have been at the time? Because Richard was his protector. You'd expect him to be surrounded by Richard's men, protecting him.
Yeah.
At this time, the coronation of Edward V, although it was postponed from May the 4th, it was still intended to take place on the 22nd of June. So maybe he would want his brother with him as he prepares for the coronation.
Mm.
And Elizabeth might be thinking her best bet was to appease Richard rather than antagonise him. Because her brother and son by her first marriage hadn't yet been executed, so maybe she was thinking it would be best for them as well. Just keep Richard sweet.
Yes.
And maybe we can everything will be all right.
Yeah, maybe he won't do horrific things.
They were executed on June the 25th, and Elizabeth had handed over her son on the 16th. So we can only imagine her thoughts when she heard the execution.
Oh, goodness.
One of her sons killed on the order of Richard, and the other two in his power. Now that Richard had the younger son, he postponed the coronation until November. So that too must have made Elizabeth's blood run cold.
More and more nervous.
Would the coronation be postponed indefinitely? But would she as we said, would she have thought at this time that her sons were in danger of being murdered? I think that's highly unlikely.
Yeah, you just wouldn't conceive of that.
She must have been terrified for them. But I doubt it's for that. It's just what's going to happen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then Rolf Shaw, or Shaw, have you spell it, preached the sermon saying that not only were the Woodville children illegitimate because Edward IV had been pre-contracted to Eleanor Butler when he married Elizabeth, but that Edward himself was illegitimate.
Ew.
In other words, he's accusing Richard's mother of adultery.
Yeah.
And we'll hear all about this in Cecily Neville's episode, and I can tell you she was none too happy about it.
I can imagine. Jeez.
She was really very cross. Now, this always seems like overkill. If you have to pile on the arguments, it sounds as if you aren't sure that each individual argument is strong enough.
Yes.
You don't like that argument? Well, I've got others.
None of them are true, so we'll just keep on giving you more, and by sheer weight of the number of them, you'll believe it. One of them will stick.
Now, this was on the 25th of June, so the same day that Anthony Woodville and Richard Grey were executed.
Oh.
And sometime during the summer, the household servants of the boys were dismissed, no longer needed. Why?
Yeah.
Elizabeth Woodville concocted a plan whereby her daughter, either Elizabeth or Cecily, would escape abroad and get help to rescue both their mother and siblings from Westminster Abbey and their brothers from the Tower. So although we think she probably didn't think they'd be murdered, she didn't want them there.
Yeah.
If the brothers couldn't be released, then Elizabeth or Cecily should declare their right to the throne. Edward IV said that Princess Elizabeth should become queen if they didn't have any sons, and it was beginning to look as if they didn't have any sons.
Yes. They had a son, but their son passed away.
Unfortunately, this plan was revealed to Richard, who put a guard on the tower to check who was coming in and out, so that plan had to be scrapped.
Wow.
But luckily, the astrologer and physician Lewis of Caerleon was allowed in and out, because who could possibly suspect an astrologer and physician?
Mm-hmm.
Even if he was also the astrologer and physician of Margaret Beaufort.
Yes.
In March 1484, Richard III made a public announcement, and I think it's worth hearing this in his own voice. I'm not going to do the Laurence Olivier voice for it. I mean, just his own words, not his own voice.
Come on.
Hi, Richard. I, Richard, by the grace of God, King of England, etc. I do like etc.
Etc. I'm not going to say it
King
all.
of England, yada, 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 yes. In the presence of you, my lord spiritual and temporal, and you, mayor and alderman of my city of London, promise and swear on the word of a king, and upon these holy evangelies of God, by me personally touched, so swearing on the Bible, that if the daughters of Dame Elizabeth Grey, notice the use of Grey there,
Yes.
late calling herself Queen of England, that is, Elizabeth, Cecily, Anne, Catherine, and Bridget, will come unto me out of sanctuary of Westminster, and be guided and ruled and demeaned by me, so obviously a change in the meaning of the word demeaned, and then I shall see that they shall be in surety of their lives, and also not suffer any manner hurt in their body by any manner of person or persons to them, or any of them in their bodies or persons by way of ravishment or defouling contrary to their wills. You wouldn't think contrary to their wills was necessary in that sentence.
But if they want it.
Yes. Not them, nor any of them imprisoned within the Tower of London or other prison, unquote. He went on to say that they be placed in respectable places of good name and reputation, and later be married to men of noble birth, and giving dower lands with an annual income of 200 marks each.
So Bridget is with them in Westminster. I thought at this point she was already in the convent.
We'll be doing Bridget next time.
Okay.
On a cameo. We've got a cameo of all the others.
Okay.
There are a few interesting here, yes. The fact that Elizabeth Woodville is called by her first husband's name and, quote, calling herself Queen, unquote. Yes. But then, I mean, what else could he call her, really?
Yes.
The mention of, I won't imprison them in the Tower, implies that he's very well aware of the accusations against him, at least of imprisonment of the princes, that they're not resident in the Tower, they're imprisoned in the Tower. So I won't lock them up.
Yeah.
I won't. It's an extraordinary statement for a monarch to have to make.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether we're looking at this statement through 21st century goggles. To us, it smacks of desperation and just sounds untrustworthy.
Yeah. And it shows what everybody else thinks of you, that you had to make that statement. Precisely.
There have to have been rumours that he would harm them for him to claim so vehemently that he wouldn't.
Yes.
Maybe it didn't seem like at the time. Maybe to him it was a promise to look after his brother's children, keeping them safe, not from himself, but from others.
Except he's saying, I will not put them in prison.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. It's so hard to... because the words are so nuanced.
Yes. And meanings have changed.
Yes. I mean, demeaning.
Yes.
Obviously, demeaning doesn't mean demeaning anymore.
No.
But that was enough for Elizabeth Woodville, who handed her daughters over, quote, forgetting her faith and promise given to Margaret, Henry's mother, unquote. And I think that quote came from Polydore Virgil, but why Margaret was so opposed to Elizabeth handing the girls over, I don't know, what was she afraid of?
Well, she had already decided that her son was going to marry Elizabeth, so handing Elizabeth over to Richard meant she was no longer available.
If he decided to marry her or married her off, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is precisely what he was thinking of, one of the other.
Yes.
Richard had drawn up the Titulus Regius, stating that the marriage between Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville was null and void, and so all the children were bastards. So was that why Elizabeth handed them over as well? If Richard was promising to find them good husbands, it might have been more than she could have done.
Yeah, because they've now been declared illegitimate and have absolutely no relation to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she wouldn't have been able to marry them off to anyone decent at all.
And with her not being queen, she doesn't get the Queen Dowager lands or any of that income or money. She would not be able to provide the dowries.
Because she's never been queen officially.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm. According to Edward Hall, Richard, quote, made all the daughters of his brother solemnly arrive at his palace as if with him new. Familiar and fond of entertainment, they were supposed to forget the trauma inflicted on them and the tyranny that preceded this, unquote. So, Edward Hall, not a Ricardian, I don't think.
No.
But, yes, it was. They all had to go as if they, they're just wiping the slate clean. Just forget about it. But didn't you know? Just forget about it. And And we heard that while they were in sanctuary, the physician and astrologer of both Elizabeth Woodville and Margaret Beaufort, Lewis of Caerleon, acted as go-between to negotiate the marriage between Elizabeth of York and Henry Tudor. Mm-hmm. And there was an addendum to that plan that if Elizabeth of York should die, then Cecily would take her place.
Oh, interesting. I didn't read that.
It's quite a hard thing to broach with a mother.
Yes.
No. Not something I would want to have to explain.
No.
Perhaps they should have got William Stanley to do it. He'd have made it perfectly clear, wouldn't he? Richard got to hear of this plot and decided to marry off the girls to keep them out of harm's way. And he may already have had plans to marry Elizabeth of York himself, because it would make sense.
Yes.
Just as she did for Henry, she'd have given Richard some of that extra legitimacy.
Yes, even though he's declared her a bastard.
Yes. And it would take her out of Henry's clutches. He also had plans to neutralise Cecily politically. And he married her off to Ralph Scrope of Upsall and Masham. And I wonder why he chose him. He was gentry, not noble. He was the second or third son. Oh. Unless Ralph's elder brother died, he had no hopes of inheriting his father's baronetcy, land or money.
Oh.
And to show just how low she's fallen, Ralph Scrope of Upsall and Masham hasn't even got his own Wikipedia page.
Wow.
Yeah. He was a neighbour of Richard up north, so maybe Richard was thinking that Cecily would effectively disappear. She'd be far from court, both socially and geographically.
Yeah, she'd have no influence whatsoever.
Yeah, it's possible that she stayed at court, so maybe socially was enough. But we're saying that the marriage to Ralph Scrope of Upsall and Masham was a socially unequal marriage. But Cecily was now officially a bastard, so that levels the playing field.
Yeah.
And this made sense for Richard. Henry Tudor had vowed in Rennes Cathedral that he would marry Elizabeth of York, and if she were unavailable for any reason, and that presumably would include if she were married, he'd marry Cecily.
So he needed to get rid of both.
Yeah. Cecily and Ralph were married in 1484. Cecily was 15. Ralph Scrope of Upsall and Masham was 23. And it shows what a damp squib this marriage was, because we know nothing about it. Mm. And I'll tell you the information I found about Ralph Scrope of Upsall and Masham on Family Search. Quote, when Ralph Scrope was born in 1463 in Upsall, Yorkshire, England, his father, Sir Thomas Scrope, was 34, and his mother, Elizabeth Greystoke, was 28. He married Cecily of York about 1485. He died on the 17th of September 1515 in Yorkshire, England, at the age of 52, and was buried in Revo, Yorkshire, England, United Kingdom, unquote.
And that's it.
That's your lot.
Oh, we don't know if she was happy. We don't know if he was nasty. We know nothing about, poor
He was
Cecily.
born, he married, he died. His mother was a Greystoke, so does that make him related to Tarzan? Tarzan was a Greystoke, wasn't he? He was Lord Greystoke. So, yeah.
So they didn't have any kids?
Doesn't seem so.
Oh, okay.
No. A year later, Henry Tudor landed at Milford Haven, marched through Wales, Battle of Bosworth, Richard dead, Henry crowned. And why can't all history be that simple? One of the first things Henry did when he got to the throne was to repeal the Titulus Regius. So not only was it repealed, but Henry did a full donatio memoriae on it. The act itself and all the documents pertaining to it were destroyed. So I'm not sure how we know about it, so obviously something got through. Anyway, they were bastards no longer, and that included Cecily. So in one move, the social gap between her and her husband had turned into a yawning chasm, because she's now sister to the Queen.
Sister to the
and
Queen
he's just
and a
Ralph
princess.
Scrope of Upsall and Masham.
Yes. She's back to being a princess.
Yeah. The York family went to Cold Harbour in London, which Henry had given to his mum, to await Elizabeth and Henry's wedding and to ensure that they wouldn't fall into the hands of Henry's enemies. Cecily and Margaret Beaufort became very close. I'm not sure why I said just Cecily rather than the other sisters. Do you know From having seen it from Margaret's point of view, why
They were
particularly Cecily?
both...
They just got on.
Well, they seem to have the same interests in learning and educating people and taking people on and caring for them. They seemed fairly similar. They didn't seem similar in their will to do things, like how stubborn Margaret of Beaufort was. But Cecily...
Cecily goes with the flow a lot more, I think, by the sound of it.
They had the same religious... what is that? Not tenacity. It's not quite fanaticism, but
I was going to say, zealotry.
Yeah. Whereas the other girls did not. They just... common interest.
Right. We can see how close Margaret and Cecily got by this description of Christmas at Collyweston, another of Margaret's places. Quote, "And sitting at a table, the Earl of Derby, her husband, the Viscount Wells, the old Lord Hastings, the Bishop of Lincoln, and by her person, under the cloth of estate, the Lady Cecily, King Edward's daughter," unquote. So, to be under the cloth of estate is quite a thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And Margaret also kept a room in readiness for Cecily whenever she wanted to visit.
Yes, and she visited a lot.
Mm.
Well, if she doesn't like her husband, Mr. Scrope, I can't do the rolling R's like you can, then maybe she found solace in going to Margaret over and over and over again.
Yes, well, that's... She was in court at this point. She was her sister's lady-in-waiting.
Yeah, so she doesn't actually have to be with her husband.
She doesn't, but usually, if you do marry, you resign your lady-in-waiting position, don't you?
Yes,
which implies that they weren't really married properly.
Yes, or your husband is also at court. Because I
can't see a reason for Rolf Scrope of Upsall and Masham to be in court, really.
No, he doesn't have the education or status to be able to do that.
No. Well, in 1486, her marriage to Rolf Scrope and Upsall and Masham was dissolved by Henry.
Thank you, Henry. She obviously didn't like him. If she did like him, she would have fought against that. I'm happy, thank you. Just leave me here.
Yeah. Well, not if he wouldn't take no for an answer, I suppose. We don't know why the marriage was dissolved. I wonder if Henry felt it was too low a marriage for a king's sister-in-law.
Oh, and it brought down the whole family?
Yeah, I mean, as he said to his mother, that man doesn't even have his own Wikipedia page. Or whether it's because he wanted to use the York sisters to reward his own men, which is also a possibility. Cecily's Aunt Catherine was married to Jasper Tudor.
Yes.
So maybe Henry saw Rolf Scrope of Upsall and Masham as a waste of a useful asset.
Yes.
But Cecily now had to rely on her sister financially. But she shouldn't have had to, since she was co-heiress with her sisters to the lands of Mortimer, the Earls of March and Clare. Ooh. And I presume that means Clare. There's a Clare in Sussex, I think, rather than the Irish one. I assume.
I don't know.
But Henry took them all. They became crown lands.
Of course
he did.
And that
left the York sisters without dowries. And I wonder what his mum had to say about that. Elizabeth gave her sisters £50 a year and other gifts, and when they were married she gave their husbands 120 quid. But that's more upkeep money than a dowry.
Yes.
I mean, you don't give £120 as a dowry. But if Henry had dissolved her marriage to Rolf Scrope of Upsall and Masham because he thought he was too low born, well, that's only my idea, but if that's the case, he's not going about it the right way of finding her a better one by nicking her lands and not giving her a dowry.
Yeah.
Anyway, Cecily was kept busy being the chief attendant to her sister. She was there at Prince Arthur's christening and carried him into Winchester Cathedral. And attending her were her sister Anne and her stepbrother Thomas Grey, Marquis of Dorset, and the Earl of Lincoln, John de la Pole, in his pre-traitor days. And they were preceded by several hundred people carrying unlit torches, which seems a bit pointless to me. Why take them if you're not going to light them?
Yeah.
She took part in the procession to the cathedral, and then they had to wait a few hours for John de Vere, who was completely taken unawares by the early arrival of Arthur, didn't make it there in time. So Thomas Stanley had to take his place and cradled the boy in his right arm, presenting him for his confirmation. I don't know if it's traditional to cradle a boy in the right arm or whether that's one of those funny little quirks of detail that you get. The party then processed to the shrine of St. Swithin, the cathedral saint, where the hymns were sung. And then the adults then enjoyed, quote, spices and hippocras, with other sweet wines in great plenty, unquote.
Yes.
While Cecily took Arthur home to his parents. Probably saying to Margaret Beaufort, are you coming? You're coming, Margaret? And Margaret's saying, not just yet.
Yes, there's cards over there.
Yeah, it's half a barrel of hippocras that won't drink itself.
It's sitting right beside me.
In fact, I've got it intravenously put in. Queen Elizabeth was lying in bed, since she'd had a bit of a fever following the birth, and Henry was sitting next to her. And Cecily laid Arthur in his mother's arms, and she, Elizabeth, was the first person to call him by his Christian name, which was apparently the tradition, which surprised me. I'd have thought that would be prerogative would be given to the father.
Yes.
But no, the mother is the first one to speak their name. Then, on November the 24th, 1487, Cecily accompanied Elizabeth to her coronation, and she held the Queen's train. And then, along with Catherine Woodville, Cecily's aunt, she rode in the first carriage behind the Queen. And it all started out stately and glamorous, but as we've heard, quote, there was so huge a people inordinately pressing to cut the ray cloth in the presence, certain persons were slain, and the order of the ladies following the Queen was broken and distroubled, unquote.
Yeah.
So there was a stampede, some people were crushed, and Cecily was one of those distroubled.
Yes. Makes it sound so nice, from screaming and uncomfortable and terrified. And
the following month, Cecily was married again, this time to one of Henry's uncles, or half-uncles, since he was Margaret Beaufort's half-brother from her mother's third marriage, John Viscount Wells.
Who would be very much older than Cecily.
He was 37.
Oh.
She's 18.
Yeah. And this is her second marriage, and she's 18.
It is, yes.
Wow.
His name's Wells. He's not the Viscount of Wells. It's not known for certain how this marriage came about. It has been said that either Henry arranged the marriage since he wasn't a threat, and so Henry could risk giving the hand in marriage to the second York sister after Queen Elizabeth. But it's also been said that Cecily might have chosen him herself. I suspect they might be muddling him up with the next one for that one. My opinion, for what that's worth, is that it was Margaret Beaufort who was the matchmaker.
She did love to do whatever she could for her own family. And apparently it was quite a caring family, because she lived with them when she was little. So maybe she thought, he's really kind, and he'll take care of her.
It sounds, from the sparse details we have, it sounds pretty happy. Mm-hmm. It's not as if she was just saying, take my brother. You have to marry somebody, you might as well marry him. She had obviously thought about it and thought, I think you two will get on. And if you're thinking, hang on a minute, Wells, we've heard of a Wells.
Yes, we have.
John Wells is related to the Robert Wells, whom we heard being beheaded before the Warwick Rebellion.
Yeah.
I found it hard to work out, but I believe that Robert was the half-nephew of John.
Okay.
So Margaret Beaufort was his step-aunt, something like that. I couldn't find a Beaufort family tree that mentioned the Welleses, so I was sort of trying to piece it together from two different family trees.
I found the same thing. I went looking and couldn't find anything, which is surprising.
If Henry had organised the marriage, Cecily might have been a reward for John Wells, because he had followed the tried and trusted Yorkist route that we've seen so often. Mm-hmm. He was close to Edward IV. He was one of the men who watched over his dead body after his death. Being an Edward man, he gave his loyalty to his son, but then fell out with Richard III for some reason, and headed out to Brittany to join Henry. He was with Henry for the invasion. He was knighted at Milford Haven and fought at Bosworth. So he ticked all the right boxes.
Yes.
Cecily and John spent Christmas with Elizabeth and Henry and Margaret. And Cecily and John gave Henry the gift of 20 shillings.
I love that.
Worse than a book token. we didn't know what to get you, so we're just giving you money.
Always money. Now we're like, money is crass, and you're not actually giving thought to the gift. But back then, you were better off giving money. They liked little purses of monbe
a king.
Yeah.
What, you shouldn't need people to give you 20 shillings.
Yeah, but this is Henry. This is to go under your bed.
Yes.
Yes.
We heard you like money, so we thought we'd give you money.
Yes.
Is that all right?
You're secretly a dragon with a hoard that you sleep on.
Cecily was no longer chief attendant to her sister, since she was now a married lady, which implied that the previous marriage didn't really count.
Not only that this marriage would have been happy, because she'd be willing to leave. There were plenty of women who were married that were still at court. Their husbands were at court. They were at court. Or vice versa. There was a couple of times where the wife was at court, but the monarch did not like the husband, so the husband was not.
Right.
Well, look at Jacquetta of Luxembourg. She was at court. She was a lady in waiting, but her husband definitely was not.
He wasn't.
No.
He wasn't born for it, was he?
No, but she was there with Margaret of Anjou, so there were plenty of examples of that.
Mm. Well, they lived mostly at Pasma Place in London. It was rented. Well, it seemed odd for a sister of the Queen to be renting, but maybe it was quite common. It just seemed a bit bizarre.
Yeah.
And all seemed lovely for a while. The couple had 2 daughters, Elizabeth and Anne. Then one of the daughters died. And then John Wells died in February 1499. He died of pleurisy.
What is pleurisy?
Lung problems.
Like tuberculosis, maybe?
Something like that.
Okay. Or is tuberculosis consumption? I don't know.
Comes the tuberculosis consumption, yeah.
Okay.
And then the other little girl died.
Oh,
so
man.
Cecily's whole family was wiped out in quick succession.
Oh, God.
A bit like Thomas Cromwell, his girls, and he's died his son, though, but his girls and wife died at the same time. Margaret Beaufort was a great comfort to Cecily, and also she was more of a practical help as well, because she helped to retain some of his estates rather than letting it go to the Wells paternal family. Because Wells had wanted them to go to Cecily, because his will reads, quote, "Also I give and bequeath to my dear beloved lady and wife Cecile, for term of her life, all my castles, manors, lands and tenements, as well such as I have purchased as all order during only her life, whom I trust above all other. That, if my goods and chattels will not suffice for the performance of this my last will, that she will then of the revenues of the profits of my inheritance perform this my last will. And I make the executors the said Cecil, my dear beloved wife, and Reynold Bray, knight," unquote.
Okay, so he actually did love her.
And it sounds as if he did, yeah. And Reginald Bray, the man closest to the king.
Was it Reginald Bray? Because when he said what did he
Reynold
call
is Reginald, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Reynold sounds very Anglo-Saxon. Reginald sounds very 1970s.
Yes.
I don't know. There's nothing in between. Cecily then returned to the Queen's household. She's now 32, so 14 years have gone by. She observed mourning for 3 years. On the 14th of November 1501, she bore the train for Catherine of Aragon at her wedding to Arthur. And she was said to look more like a marriageable girl than a widow. And by that, I don't think they meant mutton dressed up as lamb. I think they meant, she looked good for her age. And then she attended the tournaments and danced with her nephew. I'm presuming that's Prince Henry, since he seemed to monopolise the dance floor on that occasion, didn't he?
Yes.
Sometime between 1502 and the beginning of 1504, we come to the bit that you wanted to know about. Cecily fell in love.
Mm-hmm.
Her inamorata was someone called Thomas Kyme of Lincolnshire, and he belonged to the Corpus Christi Guild in Boston, Lincolnshire, which Cecily and John Wells had belonged to. So maybe she met Kymes when she was still married to Wells. Who knows?
Ooh, scandal.
Well, they might have met as friends. What is sure is that he was not of her social standing. He was a gentleman, which is fine, it's better than being a gong farmer, but she was a princess.
Yes.
Not only did they fall in love, but they were secretly married.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a secret for long.
No, and somebody was very unhappy.
Somebody's unhappy, yeah. Someone's livid. Henry, not only did it not show the sort of deference that was due to a brother-in-law and a king, But he had already decided that everything in England belonged to him anyway, including his sister-in-law, and it was his to decide how to dispose of it.
And technically, that's true.
Yes. The marriage was said to be the most unequal that England had ever seen. Which I think they're forgetting the one between Catherine de Valois and her wardrobe assistant.
Yes. Mr. Tudor.
Owen Tudor. But yes, no, it was apparently the most unequal. At the Parliament of January 1504, Cecily presented a petition, along, strangely, with the other beneficiaries of the John Wells estates. And she told the king that she wished to choose her own husband, guided by convenience, not profit. It's just an odd thing to say to the king. Yeah, leave us alone. I want to choose my own. So she told Parliament that the king might feign displeasure at the marriage as an excuse to seize her Wells property. Therefore, she proposed to bribe the king. I suspect she didn't use the word bribe. To Parliament, yeah. But it's a bit
recompense,
much, isn't it?
Not bribe. It's a recompense.
Well, to say to the Parliament, I think he's going to pretend to be cross just so he can get my land.
Yeah.
It's a bit dangerous.
Yes, and it also makes it sound like she knows Henry, and she doesn't like Henry.
It sounds like somebody rushing in to say, saying, I resign before somebody else rushes in to say, you're sacked.
Yes.
So, yeah, she's getting her word in first. She would pay a certain amount of money up front and would give him the Wells estate within 10 years of her death, which, not much good for any children she might have. And it's hard to see why the other beneficiaries would have gone along for this. Unless she shoved a bit of money their way. And she might have explained to them there'd be more where that came from, but only if she were allowed to keep her estates. And it ends with a plea for mercy signed by Cecily, Thomas Kimes, and the other beneficiaries. And the timing is hard to tell, since we don't know when she married Thomas Kimes. So we don't know whether she is rushing in before Henry gets there, or whether this is a damage limitation.
Bit of both.
We're not sure. But, whatever the case was, it didn't work.
No.
Henry was, as we've said, furious and banished her from court. And he took all her lands just as she feared he would.
Yep.
She was lucky to have Margaret on her side, because she managed to talk her son round, and eventually he did return her lands.
And she supported them. Because they had no money, Margaret had them both of them living with her, and she was paying for their upkeep. They had no money.
Yeah, when they weren't living with her, they were living on the Isle of Wight.
Oh.
They moved out there, and then they drop off the radar.
Yes, because the Isle of Wight technically is not under the King of England's authority. Hence why you had that mini-king in the Isle of Wight.
Isle of Man, you're
Isle
thinking
of Man! You're right. I'm on the wrong one. Sorry.
Yeah, there's still a law unto themselves, the Isle of Man. But the Isle of Wight, definitely not.
You say the law unto themselves, I think, ooh, raiders and everything.
Oh, no, I don't think so. No, I think they've got their own tax system, and they've got, for ages they had birching as a punishment, which we certainly didn't have on the mainland. I don't think they still have that.
And if anybody doesn't know what birching is, it's actually being hit with a birch branch.
It is, yes. Yeah, nothing subtle about it.
No, it's very descriptive.
That's what it says on the tin. They may have had 2 children, but we're not sure. If they did, the children weren't recognised by Henry VII's court. And we heard in Lady Catherine Gordon's episode that she looked after Cecily's children after Cecily had died, and that's the only evidence for these children that I could see. Oh. And Catherine Gordon left in her will, quote, "such of my apparel as shall be thought meet for her to her cousin Margaret Kimes," unquote. So it seems fitting that Cecily would have called one of her daughters Margaret, giving her close relationship with Mother Beaufort.
Yeah.
More on the subject of Catherine Gordon, she and Cecily became very good friends when they were both ladies in waiting to the Queen.
Oh, nice.
So where does that put the Perkin saga?
Ooh.
Cecily was the Duke of York's sister. Catherine Gordon, possibly the Duke of York's wife, possibly the wife of a boatman's son. I would love to have known what they talked about.
Oh, yeah. So do you think your
so
husband is
frustrating.
who he claims to be?
But Cecily would have told her because she would have
Yeah, she would have known
seen
who
him
her
in court.
brothers were.
Yeah, she'd have seen Perkin. And even if she was out of court and didn't see them, Elizabeth would have said.
Yeah.
That's very frustrating.
Yeah.
The next time we hear of Cecily is at her sister Elizabeth's funeral.
Yeah.
She wasn't there for the lying in state. Her sister Catherine took that role. So maybe Henry wasn't prepared to forgive everything.
He doesn't seem like the forgiving kind.
But I also read that she wasn't at the lying in state because she was just too upset to do it. But I also read that she wasn't at the funeral, so there's lots of contradicting reports.
But isn't there a tradition that the royal family does not attend funerals?
The parents don't, do they?
No.
I'm not sure. That's it. We hear nothing more about her until she died on the 24th of August, 1507.
Then she lived happily ever after.
It does sound like it. The last years, hopefully.
Well, I'm assuming
nice.
that, honestly, because if it hadn't been happy, there probably would have been mentions in court. Henry might have taken action of something. Yeah, so it was happy.
The least he'd say is, I told you so.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Isle of Wight's lovely. Yeah. Nice by the sea. Very pleasant.
Yep.
We don't know where she died. We don't know what she died of. Some documents signed by the king refer to her as, quote, the late wife of the late John Viscount Wells, unquote, with no mention of Thomas Kimes.
Of course not.
No. She was possibly buried at Quar Abbey, a Cistercian monastery on the Isle of Wight, but that was destroyed during the Reformation. Oh, that Reformation.
Yeah.
So irritating.
So much history gone.
Yeah. Maybe she died at Old Hatfield House and was buried near there. I'm not sure where Old Hatfield House is, but there is an old palace at Hatfield Park. But that was built around 1485 by Bishop John Morton, so that would fit in quite nicely. It's a beautiful building, open to the public, in Hertfordshire. Looks lovely. What we do know is that Margaret paid for Cecily's funeral. As I said at the beginning, we'll look at what happened to Cecily's relations. So, it's a depressing roster. Battle of Edgecote. Cecily's maternal uncles Earl Rivers and John Woodville were executed on Warwick's orders. Her sister Mary died at the age of 14. Another sister Margaret died in infancy, as did her brother George. 1470, their first sanctuary. 1485, her father died. Then they were back in sanctuary. Her uncle and half-brother Anthony Woodville and Richard Grey were executed on the orders of Richard. Her brothers disappeared, presumably murdered. 1499, one of her girls with John Wells died, and then John died, and then another girl died.
Yeah, gosh.
And then she died young, only 38 years old. So,
yeah.
a hard life, I think.
Oh, you left
sad
out
life.
her sister. Her sister died.
I
Queen.
think I put that one in. Mary died.
Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, Queen Elizabeth died. Yes, of course. Yes, I did forget her.
So it's even worse. God.
It is. Yeah, I hope that if she did have children with Thomas Kimes, that they survived. So that's it. Shall we review her?
Yes.
Amphibole.
As I said, she did seem to go with the flow. And the only times that she seemed to fight against things was when Margaret Beaufort stepped in and said, no, I'm getting your estates back, don't you worry.
Yeah.
And that's Margaret, not Cecily.
Yeah. So,
but she did marry secretly. I mean, that's quite a big thing.
Yeah, but she married
secretly,
down.
knowing that the king was going to be fuming with you.
Yeah.
But to do it anyway. She's marrying for love. I think that's quite a big thing because...
Yes, it is. For a princess to do?
She must have really had to take her courage in both hands to do it.
Yeah, because she'd know that he'd be unhappy. Not only that, she'd basically be destitute. Well, she would consider it destitute compared to being a princess.
Yeah, they're not on the breadline, but...
No.
But she chose... I mean, it's incredibly romantic going to choose to live out your last years on the Isle of Wight. I say last years, 38.
Yeah.
But on the Isle of Wight with the man you love.
Yeah, and knowing that when you had to do it, you were so in trouble you had to live with Margaret Beaufort for a few years until Margaret had smoothed the waters.
Yes. I mean, not just financially, but presumably protecting. She acted as a buffer between Cecily and Henry.
They could have been put in prison for that.
They could have been easily, yes. I mean, Margaret, she was a Margaret, wasn't she? Douglas. Yeah, Margaret Douglas was put in prison.
Yes.
Margaret Tudor's daughter.
Yeah, and Elizabeth puts in Catherine Grey, I believe, in prison for marrying without permission.
Yeah, I think, although mostly, I would say she doesn't fight back at all. That moment is huge.
Yes.
Because she does sound quite timid. I don't know if she was, but that's the impression that's coming across. So to take that leap.
Really? I don't consider her timid.
You don't think she was?
We haven't...
I don't know. I suppose because all we know about her is things that were done to her. We don't know of her doing anything apart from marrying Thomas Kymes.
Very true. At the same time, the position she was put in, she didn't have political clout to be able to influence anything, really.
Also, the other thing about marrying down is she knew what it was like suddenly to lose everything. She'd done it. She'd had it twice.
Yes. And she was willingly doing it a third time.
Yeah.
And with her first marriage. Her first marriage was also marrying down. So she would have experienced...
But that wasn't her choice.
Yeah, but she would have known what she was going into at that point, I would think. She would know what kind of housing conditions and resources
she was. And I think Ralph Scrope of Upsall and Masham was quite a bit... He was a baronet, so he was quite a bit higher than Thomas Kymes. So she knew she was going lower.
Mm-hmm. I think I'll give her a 3 just for forcing that autonomy. That's about the only thing we have that she did, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 3 is about right. I mean, the entirety of that 3 is the marriage.
Yes.
I can't see anything else that she's really done.
Yeah.
So 6.
6.
Antiperistasis.
Rise and fall.
Oh, this one's going to be difficult.
She was born a princess and died the wife of a Lincolnshire gentleman, so...
Yes, it looks like a sine wave, just straight up and down.
But she was, I presume, was she still officially a princess?
Yes, she is. She wouldn't have lost her status.
I don't think Henry can take that away from her.
No, but she lost it from Richard. Richard took away her status. Henry puts it back
and took away her legitimacy.
Yes. So she really fell.
Yeah. I think she's had... the whole York family are just on a roller coaster. Yeah.
They've got to be really high in antiperistasis
because
they went both directions so widely.
And to be a royal family, and we don't look at royals very much, do we? I mean,
no. To not even being a titled person at the end. She wasn't married to a titled person twice.
Yeah. Well, Ralph Scrope of Upsall and Masham was it? No, his dad was a baronet.
His dad was a baronet, and you said
he was a lower son.
Yeah, so he had no title. He was probably an honourable.
Yeah. As we know, honourables very rarely live up to their name. I think...
do people know what an honourable is?
Oh, it's just... Oh, we've got so many of them.
Yeah, it's basically a lower son. It's just a courtesy title for people who are born to the gentry or the noble classes, but were too far down the ranks to be considered a lord or a lady or have a title of their own.
That's what they were then. You can actually earn an honourableness now.
Really?
Yes, because I think I mentioned this before. I knew somebody, one of our neighbours was an honourable because he'd been selling tobacco in Africa.
I'm sorry, that made him an honourable?
As I say, honourable does not necessarily mean honourable.
Okay.
So I think you can, well, let's say earn. It's not earn,
pay for
is
it? Buy it.
Yes.
You can buy it.
I'm going to go for a 9, I think. I mean, if you're royal...
Yeah.
And you go up and down, you lose not only your status as a royal, but you use your status as a legitimate daughter.
Yes. I was going to say a 9 as well. The only reason she doesn't get a 10 is because she doesn't end up on the street.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
Yeah.
So 18.
Wow.
Yeah, doing well.
Yeah.
Martyrdom.
She does risk going to prison for marriage.
She does. I mean, apart from that, the rest of her life is completely mapped out.
Yes. For her. She does not stand up for herself very much there.
I mean, she wasn't given a chance of becoming a martyr, but when she fell in love with Kimes, she went for it.
Yeah. But still, that's not...
It's still something you're doing for yourself.
Her, it would have been huge. And at the time, she's going against the king. She knows that she could lose everything, go to prison, and never see this man anyway.
Yeah.
So that is actually very big for her.
I wonder if that would have happened if Margaret hadn't stepped in.
Possibly. Margaret had to speak for quite a long time, for a few years, to try to get Henry to settle. And the reason she took them into her house was because she knew they wouldn't be arrested while in her house. So they never actually left her side.
It doesn't look good, does it, if the king sends the troops into his own mother's house?
Yes.
Yeah.
He might send tax collectors, but he won't actually arrest
tax collectors into a kindergarten. I mean, he's got no scruples about that.
No. So that says a lot, the fact that she was with her, with Margaret, for a couple of years to save themselves from Henry. So that is huge. And we have to remember that she'd never go into battle. So ignore that part. We have to look at it from a woman's perspective at that time. And this is massive.
Yeah, I think when we first wrote Martyrdom, we were thinking of people like the Maid of Kent, or somebody who actually gave up their life for religious reasons. But Martyrdom, as we discovered, covers a multitude of different options.
Yes. How far are you willing to go for what you believe or desire? And I'd say this is... For a woman at that time, being a princess, knowing that you have no legal authority to make your own decisions, I would say this is a 10.
I don't want to go for 10 because I'm thinking about the people who burnt at the stake for religious reasons.
Okay.
I might go with
fair.
7, I think, because it is big, but it's not...
Okay.
It's not that... The people who sort of almost threw themselves into the flames, in effect.
Yeah, and we are going to get there.
Yeah. Don't want to get there, but we will get there.
Okay, I'll drop down to a 7. No, I'll go an 8, because I still think she had the possibility of dying in prison.
Yeah.
It may not be flames, but prisons back then were not nice. 15
is a lot more than I was expecting her to get.
Yeah.
18.
0. There's nothing.
If people know her at all, they know her via the story of the Princess and the Tower.
Yeah.
They know that the mum and the sisters were in sanctuary. But other than that, I think they probably get her muddled up with Cecily Neville, because I certainly did. That's who I thought we were doing. So... I'm going to give her 1 just for being, she was one of the sisters with the Princess in the Tower. So people might not know her name, but they'd know of the group of people.
That's fair. I'll give her a 1.
Okay, so 2.
For being that unnamed, unseen child. Yes. That's a pity 1.
So 2 for the team.
Flaunt a bleeding flaunt.
Oh, wow, she is pretty. Very blonde.
Very blonde, yes. Golden hair. Hair of woven pure gold, I think, by the look of that.
Yeah. Gosh.
And I should say, this is from a stained glass in the Royal Window in Canterbury Cathedral. Well, that's where it originally was. It's now in the Burrell collection in Glasgow. And if you go onto their website, this picture is the one that comes up under highlights of the collection.
Oh.
So there's apparently...
They made her very pretty.
There's a modern replica in Canterbury now, apparently. So maybe it was at risk of falling to pieces if it had been left in situ. But she does. She looks like the archetypal princess, doesn't she? Like you'd find in a children's story. very long blonde, golden hair.
Yes. It's beautiful.
Crown made. Is it a crown? It's not a tiara. It goes right the way round.
It looks like a crown.
Yeah.
It doesn't have this. Okay, try to describe it. So it is a stained glass window, so they do have to make it somewhat simple because it has to follow somewhat geometric shapes. She is wearing a full crown. It doesn't have like the spiky bits on the top or the cross. It's basically a circlet.
Yeah.
With it almost looks like she's got those. What are those pendants called where they're white? There's usually a white face on it. What are those
cameo?
Called? Cameo. It looks like a bunch of cameos on a circlet.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't look that hard. It looks like it looks quite malleable.
Yeah.
In the picture. Whether it was or not, I don't know. But
the cameos are actually crosses. White crosses within an oval.
I think it looks
Very
lovely
pretty.
because the background is a rather beautiful
Blue.
deep blue.
Yeah.
With black tracings, and she sort of stands out.
And she's wearing a gorgeous burgundy gown. They did a lot of detail in that gown. I wonder how they did that. That's amazing. On a stained glass window. She does have an ermine collar with another almost... It looks like they matched the circlet on her dress.
Got the white crosses.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Very lovely. There's apparently a depiction of her in Malvern Abbey, but I couldn't find any sign of it. There is a window showing St Mary that was given to the Abbey by Henry VII, and there's also a rather wonderful picture that I sent you of Queen Victoria with Kaiser Wilhelm standing behind her. And it's strange because it looks like a photo done in stained glass.
Yes, it does.
It's not the slightest bit relevant to Cecily, but there's lots of very Victorian facial hair. And I just found it so weird that I included it, even though it's absolutely nothing to do with Cecily.
Yeah, it does look like an etching, but they did the same sort of detail on her face, too. It looks like a likeness. It doesn't look like what would happen if I tried to do a stained glass face.
Yes, it's pure white, her face.
Yeah.
I mean, there's shading, there's black shading, but it's not a flesh colour at all. It's just white.
No.
I think that's gorgeous.
There's not much symbology, but I do think it's beautiful. I'll give that a 7.
Yeah, I think a 7. Yeah, it's in Canterbury Cathedral. Well, not anymore, but it was in Canterbury Cathedral, so it shows that she was known. She was a figure to be reckoned with.
Yeah. So that's a 7 for Flaunt-a-Flaunt with a total score of 48.
Well, that's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's very good, isn't it?
She did better than Margaret Tudor.
Yeah. Well, Margaret, yeah.
She did better than quite a few people, actually. Yeah, it is good.
Well done. Well, we got a question to ask. Well,
we do.
Our resident aggressive Cockney has a question to ask.
Are they too delicious, or what?
What do you think?
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with a no. There's not enough information. She didn't actively do anything. I don't know. She doesn't stand out.
She doesn't. She actively married Thomas Kimes, but that's not enough to give you too delicious.
No. I liked her.
Yeah, I'm glad she did it. I hope she was very happy, but it's not enough for too delicious.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I feel bad about that one.
I don't know. Would she expect it?
Probably not.
For someone who's decided to get married and move to the Isle of Wight, that doesn't sound like somebody who wants too delicious.
Yeah, she's not standing out there saying, look at me, look at me. But part of me's worried she'd be sitting there saying, yeah, story of my life.
Nobody notices me until I do something wrong.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. No, I think she'd be all right with that. I think she's...
Yeah. I'd be. Okay. Maybe she's an introvert.
Yeah. Well, yes, it does make me think that she didn't look for a prince to marry. She looked for the man she'd met in Lincoln.
Yes.
I think it's the Isle of Wight as well. It's very sort of, I'm sure people in the Isle of Wight will say we're not at all like this, but it's very old-fashioned and conservative with a small c. So the idea of them moving there, and it's When I'm 64, the Beatles song.
Yes.
They moved, they're on the Isle of Wight. So it's just got that feel of domesticity, and I can imagine them growing their own veg. And
she goes for my 4 C's.
Yeah, so it does sound like it.
Cozy, comfortable, calm contentment.
I think that's what she went for.
Yeah.
And you don't need Tudorlicious for that.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So I think we probably did the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I got to get the bag. Hold on.
Oh, gosh. I'd forgotten about this bit. And I would just say that for somebody we don't know much about and who didn't have much agency, we've gone for nearly 2 hours talking about her. Well, talking about the people around her.
Okay, next one. I think you're going to like this one.
Am I? Ooh.
Pope Julius.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's going to sound as if we set it up now, because I said that's the one I wanted when we did the question and answer
Well,
one.
you didn't. Sorry, it's fully random. We just sort of pull out of that.
So we get
Pope
to hear
Julius.
just how awful the Borgias really were, and we get to hear about the... Allen trade.
Yes, finally. From the first episode until now.
And honestly,
Finally
that
get to
is
hear
going to be
about
more interesting than it sounds.
Yes, because technically it's piracy.
Yes. I don't know, it even goes beyond that, doesn't it? There's tricking the Pope, having dealings with the infidel. There's an awful lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that'll be neat.
Excellent. I do like me a Pope.
Is Pope Julius the warrior Pope?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, we've come across him a lot in the Patreon episodes.
Yeah.
So he's a complete nutter, isn't he?
Yes. yes, he is. Oh, cool.
Excellent. Very good.
That is the end of our episode on Cecily of York. We hope you have enjoyed it and will join us for the next episode on ...
Well, her sisters, actually, for the cameo episode. And then after that, there is... I was going to say mini episode on Columbus, but it's not a mini episode at all. Not episode, episodes.
Yes. Which
There's
we may break up a bit, so it's not so sad.
There's a lot of really interesting stuff. When I was reading it, I kept nudging Rob, because he was listening to something on his earphones, saying, listen to this. He'd grudgingly take his earphones off. So, no, there's a lot of very, very interesting stuff in it. So don't be put off by the fact it's sad and miserable. It's not all sad and miserable, and it's interesting.
Okay.
Honest.
Okay.
You can find details of the podcast and contact us on... TrueTheRiverus.wordpress.com. Email TrueTheRiverus@gmail.com. We're on Podbean and all the usual platforms. Also Facebook and Twitter and Instagram.
In the meantime, for what is wedlock forced but a hell, an age of discord and continual strife? Whereas the contrary bringeth bliss and a pattern of celestial peace.
Yeah, I hope they got bliss and celestial peace in the end.
Yeah.
Fools are as like husbands as pilchards are to herrings. The husband's the bigger. I don't understand that. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
I'm Ralph Scrope of Upshall and Masham, and if they're going to mock my name, they know that I will thrash 'em. I married royalty, so don't anybody mess with me. I'll not tolerate it, and I'll show them no compassion, 'cause I'm Ralph Scrope of Upshall and Masham. I suggest that you learn it and repeat it parrot fashion. It's no laughing matter, I'll make your nose considerably flatter, and leave you in a state that will ruin your olfaction, 'cause I'm Ralph Scrope of Upshall and Masham. If anybody mocks my name, I'll demand satisfaction. Descended not from Tarzan, I can trace my name back to Athelstan, and anyone who questions it will find themselves in traction. I'm Ralph Scrope of Upshall and Masham. Dum-dee-dum-dee-dum-dee-dum, dum-dum-dum-basham. Dum-dee-dum-dee-dee, dooby-dooby, mess with me, 'cause I'm Ralph Scrope.